Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the members back to our virtual view this morning for our remote meeting. And thanks to all of you who are watching and attending this for the third meeting this week. I'm starting to empathize a lot with flight attendants as I share with you a few notes to announce about conducting virtual meetings. The meeting must comply with the requirements of the Open Meeting Act. Accordingly, KBE members who are tuning in virtually must ensure their video is streaming and they can be seen throughout the duration of the meeting. Members tuning in virtually, please mute your microphone when not talking. However, all discussions must be broadcast to the public. Therefore, be sure your microphone is not on mute when you speak. You guys are getting really good at that. Every time you speak during the meeting, please unmute your mic, state your name, and take a short pause. This will give the software time to recognize you and show your picture. For any items that require a vote, a roll call vote will be necessary to record the vote of each member. At that time, the member should state his or her name, pause, and then say, I vote blank. Also, please remember to silence or turn off other electronic devices that may cause disruption to your sound feed. So great to see you this morning. Jennifer, if you would, please call the roll.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi.
Joanne Adams.
This is Joanne Adams. I am present.
Claire Batt.
You may be muted, Claire.
I think she is. Holly Bloodworth.
This is Holly Bloodworth. I'm here.
Mike Bowling. Alvis Johnson.
This is Alvis Johnson. I'm here, and our video is awfully fuzzy.
Okay, Alvis, we'll reach out to you about your video. Cody Polly Johnson.
Cody Polly Johnson, present.
Patrice McCrary.
This is Patrice McCrary. I'm here.
Sharon Porter Robinson.
This is Sharon Robinson. I'm present.
Lee Todd.
This is Lee Todd, and I'm present.
Lou Young.
This is Lou Young, and I am present.
Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman.
This is Jacqueline, and I'm present, and I'm having video issues, so I'm working on it.
Sounds great. Good to have you. CPE President Aaron Thompson.
This is Aaron. I'm present.
Allison Sloan.
This is Allison Sloan, and I am present.
Thank you, everyone. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Jennifer. First item on our agenda is an amendment to KAR 7:125E, pupil attendance. First read, KBE Interim General Counsel Todd Allen, KBE Associate Commissioner Kelly Foster, KBE Associate Commissioner Robin Kinney, and KBE Division Director David Cook will present the proposed emergency amendment to 702 KAR 7:125E, pupil attendance. This emergency administrative regulation is being filed to allow school districts the ability to provide and receive funding for a variety of instructional delivery models to meet the needs of their students and communities in light of continued COVID-19 risks and necessary prevention measures. I'll turn it over to Todd, and board members, you do have this information in the portal.
Thank you, Chair Young, and good morning, board members. The next two items that are before you regarding emergency amendment to regulations come to you as a result of a multi-step process. So through webcasts that the commissioner has conducted with various constituent groups, superintendents, directors of pupil personnel, directors of district finance, it was identified that school districts need flexibility for the upcoming school year as a result of COVID-19 and the state of emergency that we face, to conduct a variety of instructional models as school opens, and to have the flexibility to change those instructional delivery models based on where we find ourselves in the COVID-19 pandemic as school continues through the 2020-21 school year. So as a result of those conversations that the commissioner conducted with the various constituent groups, it was determined that the school districts, first of all, needed the ability to grant more than 10 NTI days. Statute limits NTI days to 10. If you'll recall, historically, those were used in events of snow, ice, other types of intermittent emergencies that school districts faced, and have been used for several years in that regard. But as a result of COVID-19, 10 days just wasn't sufficient. The General Assembly took action with Senate Bill 177 for the past school year, the 1920 school year, to grant the commissioner the authority to give an unlimited number of NTI days to school districts, and that was identified as a need for the upcoming school year as well. Also, as school districts open, they anticipate that they will have students who will be in somewhat hybrid learning models. So some students may be learning remotely from home or from another location, while other students are reporting to the building for in-person instruction. And our funding mechanism that has existed for many years under SEEK, unfortunately, doesn't allow for that type of model to occur. It's based on either all students reporting to the school building for in-person instruction or all students being on remote NTI instruction. So, fortunately, the governor had entered an executive order 2020-243 that the commissioner previously relied upon to temporarily suspend a statute that required a civics exam for all high school seniors to graduate. And the commissioner relied upon that executive order again to temporarily suspend statutes that capped NTI days at 10 days and temporarily suspend statutes that ties in-person seat attendance to SEEK funding for the upcoming school year. So with those statutes temporarily suspended for the upcoming school year, we are now coming to the state board with emergency regulations to put the rules in place that will apply to the upcoming school year, specifically to grant the commissioner the authority to grant an unlimited number of NTI days to school districts, and to also decouple that attendance from the SEEK funding. The mechanism that is proposed to you regarding funding is one that the General Assembly adopted in Senate Bill 177 for the past school year that allowed school districts to select previous year's data to calculate their SEEK funding. With that kind of background information, I'll turn it over to Associate Commissioners Kinney and Foster to walk through the regulations that are before you.
Thank you very much, Todd, and good morning to everyone. It's nice to be online with you this morning. If I can ask Joette to take us to our PowerPoint that we have for you this morning, and I'm going to turn off my camera to kind of preserve bandwidth for you, but we're going to walk you through it. Todd has done an excellent job in kind of setting forth the process and why this is necessary. We are going to share with you information that has been shared widely this week related to the emergency regulations for both attendance and SEEK funding. We have been in front of the superintendents at the webcast where we provided a summary, kind of a high-level overview of the emergency regulations. We did that at the webcast on Tuesday. We have been in front of the local superintendent's advisory board council yesterday and shared with them. And then we were also in front of the Interim Joint Committee on Education on Tuesday. So lots of people have already seen this at a very high level. And we just wanted to share with you some of the materials that we also shared with them from a background and understanding perspective. So if we can go to the first slide, Joette, please. As Todd has talked about, the governor's executive orders, the actions of the General Assembly through Senate Bill 177, and of course, the good work of the Kentucky Board of Education for your waivers throughout the coronavirus pandemic have really worked to provide the support that we need for our local school districts. We are going to focus today on how these emergency regulations address the different instructional delivery methods that districts are now choosing at this point in time, and how that relates to attendance and then funding as a result of that. Next slide, please. As a quick refresher, Senate Bill 177, as I said earlier in our discussions this week, who would have thought that a 4-page bill could do so much? But we really needed that 4-page bill, Senate Bill 177, to help us effectively and efficiently close out the last school year. And we're looking to it for many of the things that, as we look forward, the unlimited number of NTI days that Todd had referenced earlier. We will continue to look at that minimum of 1062 instructional hours. And then there were some provisions in Senate Bill 177 that we really didn't have to effectuate, but they were there, although they weren't needed. So really nice that we had that flexibility for our local school districts. Next slide, please. And importantly, as it related to funding and how we ended that school year, many of you working with local school districts know that at any given time, local school districts have to kind of think in 3 different years all at once. They're looking to the year behind them as they think about what they just finished and what that attendance looked like. They're looking at the year that they're currently in and thinking about attendance, and then how does that affect the year that follows? Because we're always looking a year back on our attendance that then equates to funding for the next year. Because our school year ended so differently than it does in typical years, Senate Bill 177 came up with this mechanism for districts to choose either the use of 1819 attendance data or 1920 attendance data, which would be most beneficial for them as we look forward for this school year's funding. So Senate Bill 177, by that allowance, then set forth how we're going to fund the school year that's upcoming. So as we think about our emergency regs, we're already looking at the next school year, and we have to have that same type of mechanism because we know we're not going to all be in person at the same time, and we're all not going to be remote at the same time. So essentially, we're going to take this model and we're going to just move it forward one more year. That's basically what we're doing with these emergency regulations. Next slide, please. And the other reason we need to do this is, of course, Senate Bill 177 only applied to the 1920 school year. So as soon as we got through that school year, while there were very good elements of Senate Bill 177, those have now expired. And so we have to look forward to put some of those same requirements in place for the next school year. Next slide, please. As we talked with superintendents, finance officers, DPPs, all the folks out in our local school districts to seek their input and feedback on how we might best move forward in this unprecedented time, we came up with things that we would like to see as goals as we came up with that new funding structure. We came up with kind of these list of goals that we shared with our local school districts. We wanted the fund structure to be temporary. Our funding structure has been around for a long time. It has good components to the funding structure, and we wanted to make sure that we're not making drastic changes in the time of a crisis. Any changes to our funding structure on a permanent basis requires a lot of thoughtful consideration before we would do that. So we want whatever we're doing to be temporary in nature. We want it to be explainable. It's important that people can understand what we're doing, that our citizens understand, as well as all those people in our local school districts that rely upon it can explain it. It has to be flexible, of course. We've talked about all the variations in instruction that are going to occur across our 171 school districts. And it has to be adaptable throughout the year because we may have peaks in the virus that may cause districts to have to make those shifts. So our funding model needed to be flexible. It needs to be predictable, not to say that they will know exactly the amount of dollars that were not a guarantee on the amount, but those components have to be predictable. So they have to understand what that's going to look like. We've also talked about it being verifiable. We typically do audits on attendance, and we are moving away to a different type of model for accountability. And I believe our districts will embrace that accountability. But we have built in, and you'll hear from David Cook a little bit later about we are moving to this model of participation for being verifiable and familiar, meaning as much normal as possible. Anytime you make changes in order to train and educate the workforce that is going to be interacting with it, if you can make things as familiar as possible, that of course is preferred. And finally, probably our most important goal was to not create any type of funding mechanism that would incentivize or discourage the decisions for either in-person or remote instruction. We want to make sure that funding is secondary to the good decisions that do need to be made in your local communities about the best way to provide that instructional support for our children. Next slide, please. So now we look toward student participation and funding calculations for the next school year. Next slide. As we've talked about, we will maintain the same AADA-related data choices that districts made previously. If you'll remember, we've talked about this before as we ended the school year. We had 14 districts that chose to use the 1920 data. Everyone else chose 1819. We are going to mirror the provisions of Senate Bill 177 by decoupling attendance-driven funding to allow for participation. And we think by doing this, the district calendar and attendance decisions will not be impacted by those funding decisions. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to turn it over to, with that backdrop, turn it over to David Cook. And David is going to talk to us about non-traditional instruction and our new look at participation and how districts will be required to collect and report participation data.
Thank you, Robin. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you virtually. I just wanted to say hello before I turned my camera off, so you could know that I'm here, just like you guys have to sort of check in. So I think I want to start just real briefly. This slide doesn't have a lot of text on it, but it's important for us to remember there's a fairly significant broadening of this term. Before it was as Todd pointed out, it was a program that was limited to mostly weather-related closures. It was limited to closures only, and now we're in a different place. So we tend to talk about non-traditional instruction as all of the different types of remote learning that might occur, whether those are partial closure where some students aren't coming, or whether they're full-blown NTI days as we've learned to talk about them in the past. Next slide, please. Real quickly, you guys have heard this before. Pilot began in 2011. In 2014-15, it was opened to the entire state. Senate Bill 177 provided an unlimited number of days, and today we are part of this is asking for an extension of that. Next slide, please. This is a little bit of the same information. You all, as you know, back in March, granted a waiver to the application deadline requirement, so all 172 districts could submit an application. Here's the big number that we've, I think, mentioned to you before. In a normal year, when we only have closures for weather-related situations, we run between 300 and 500 NTI days per school year. Just in the COVID closure alone, we had 6,240 NTI days. So you see the vast difference in the way the program was utilized this spring. Next slide, please. So during the COVID closure, as we've mentioned, participation has been part of NTI from the beginning. It's always been how districts collected data on students' engagement in instruction when school was closed under NTI. In the spring, in the COVID situation, what we did at the state level was we limited our collection of that data. Although teachers were putting it in on a daily basis, we collected it on a weekly basis. It was a really large situation for us to do it, and them, all of that having, because at the time we weren't really using IC, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what's exciting for me as the guy who's been doing NTI from the beginning is we kept those participation rates pretty high. 90% is a really good number statewide, and we were really glad and to see that in a normal NTI year, or a regular NTI years, we've come to call them. We have anywhere from 90 to 93% participation. So for all the extenuating circumstances of the COVID closure, that's pretty good rate. Next slide, please. So here's what's going to happen for the 2021 school year. And I think the first thing you need to know about this is because of the vast array of models that districts are sharing with us that they're going to be used, as Robin pointed out, we needed something that was pretty standard across the board so that districts weren't thinking about things as regular or in-class participation and NTI. They were thinking about all the students as a whole and how do we most effectively identify their participation in school. So all kids this fall using the Infinite Campus system will be coded for participation rather than attendance. For a student that is an in-person student, whether that be 2 days a week or every day or whatever that case might be, anytime that they show up at school, their participation is their presence. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. For kids who are doing remote learning, whether that remote learning is full-time, whether it's part-time, whether it's because we had to close for COVID and all kids are remote, that participation looks like a little bit more like it has been for NTI in the past. It's going to be about us, how do we see that kid participating in school on a day when they're not visually in front of us. And we'll talk about the ways about that in just a minute. A couple of things I did want to point out to you that are very important to note at this time as we move into the fall and this school year. An exciting thing for myself and the review team as we reviewed NTI applications for next year is a definite shift by almost all districts. And a lot of districts were paper-based districts last fall. In other words, they focused on paper-based assignments and they had digital where it was possible. Most districts are making the shift to the other way around. They are building a digital-based remote learning process with paper being the backup when a student needs it because of access. So their general philosophy, culture, mentality is shifting to a digital mindset. The other thing is we are seeing a lot of districts in their applications talk about the use of their CARES money to beef up their devices that they're offering to students, as well as how they're creating connectivity options through hotspots and other things for students. So just wanted you all to be aware that those are the kinds of things our districts are thinking about as they move forward with this situation. Next slide. So I mentioned already that participation for students who are sitting in a seat, like we've always done it, is they're sitting in the seat. That's the participation. You should note that participation is going to be recorded daily, but you'll see a little bit of a caveat to that. So there will be a daily participation entered by teachers for every kid. Now, when we get to those situations of remote learning, NTI situations, whether that NTI is part-time, full-time, whatever the case might be, they're just not physically present in the school. We're going to give them 4 options of ways they could determine that participation had occurred. And again, remember, this is daily. The first is there are one-on-one chats or phone calls for students who don't have digital access between a teacher and a student, or the teacher and a parent if it's a smaller child or a child with special needs. So that interaction, that's a 2-way communication between teacher and student. That's way number 1. Second way is there could be group chats. So the teacher schedules a time when groups of students within a class or a whole class meet with that teacher. That's another way you can check participation on a daily basis. The third and probably most used will be most districts, as we know, have a learning management system in place. Over 150 of our 172 have that now. Those logins to those learning management systems and those interactions between teachers and students inside those learning management systems will be probably one of the largest ways we determine this participation. And then finally, because we know it will still occur, there will be packets that will be submitted or sent out to students that will be collected. We find that the collection of those packets is normally a weekly collection for most districts that do that. So that's when I'm going back to what I said a minute ago. It's a daily entry of participation, but it is okay for the district to do that daily entry on a weekly basis, if that makes sense to you. So, for instance, for those kids who are submitting paper packets, the teacher could take the packet and open it and look at it and go back and record the daily participation for that student based on their completion of the work. So it doesn't, in other words, you don't penalize a student or teacher if you're doing a weekly submission of instructional material, of assignments, and they can't give it to you every day. So that's important to note, that participation, while it is recorded daily, can be recorded on a weekly basis, particularly for those students who are in a paper-based environment. So all of that will happen in the Infinite Campus system. And then Robin's going to talk in just a minute about the way we're going to report that. It's also important to remember, and every year we go through NTI, and Chairman Young was involved with us a little bit with NTI at one point, is we need to remember always that the purpose of participation is the engagement of the student, the interaction between the teacher and the student. It is in essence a substitute for how we're measuring in-person presence of students. It is not the determination of the quality of work the student did. This is about, are they doing the work they're supposed to be doing? Just like you would be looking at a kid in a classroom and how they're participating in work in the classroom. We still have grading. Grading is still the means by which we determine the quality of the work. So that teacher gets that packet submitted on a Friday. They're looking at it for 2 reasons. One is, did they do the work, which is why we're checking off participation. And then they're also looking at it to put stuff in the grade book about what that work looked like. So sometimes I've had people concerned or confuse the 2 things. That NTI collection of work is about the quality of the work. No, it's about the work actually being done. We're gonna study it for grading purposes, right? So I just wanted to point that out. Next slide, please. Okay, I've already mentioned most of that, but I know that Robin wants to talk to you a little bit about how we're going to report this beyond the recording of it by teachers all over the state.
Thank you, David. I think the other thing, which is certainly of interest and rightfully so, is just making sure that districts are being transparent about how their participation process is actually working. And we have interest from families, we have interest from legislators and other interested constituents about what that looks like. As we finished the last school year and started looking at the percentages that David has talked about, we felt it was really important to continue to have a collection and reporting process. So in the emergency regulation, you will see that districts will be required to report both in-person and non-traditional instruction participation through Infinite Campus. And Infinite Campus has been working with us as well as other states that they service so that we'll have a way to collect that information. It will be reported in 3 times in the school year. Reported, and we are hopeful that Infinite Campus will be able to generate this report, so it won't be a lot of work for our districts, provided that their teachers are keeping up with that participation on a daily or weekly basis. But that participation will be reported out in October, January, and July. And then we will post that participation by districts to our KBE website and report that to the General Assembly, the Legislative Research Commission. As this is going to be a little bit different, and we are shifting to this participation look rather than an attendance look, the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support, which is Dr. Kelly Foster's office, and David and his team will work with the Office of Finance and Operations, my team that typically works in the attendance world. And we will assist our districts in helping them to become more familiar with this new, little different process of participation. So we'll help them to learn how to collect, record, and report participation as we move forward. And that is our last slide for our PowerPoint. I would like to quickly, you have in your materials the emergency regulations themselves. So I would like to quickly just walk through some of the highlights of the e-regs so that you can see. Much of this has already been covered, but we'll go through this fairly quickly and just kind of point out the highlights for your information. Joette, if we could please start with the attendance reg 702 KAR 7:125. While Joette is pulling that up, I'm happy to take any questions you may have at this point. Oh, there we go. She's got it up for us already. Okay, so if we can start on page 3 of the student attendance reg. And you'll see starting at line 18 on page 3. There we go. Right there is where we start talking about daily participation. And that's where we start talking about how both in person, so for your in-person participation, teachers will be very familiar with that because they're used to doing these type of processes already in an attendance format, looking toward attendance. But many of these processes will be exactly the same as our teachers do right now for those in-person students. If we can move to page 4, please. Down to line 17. And you'll see that's where we start picking up and talking about what non-traditional instruction means and what that will look like in many of the things that David talked about. It's a measure of student engagement, not student performance. And it talks about the different models that David walked us through onto page 5 of the different types that participation can be, the evidence of participation can be obtained by our teachers and then recorded in the student information system. If we then go to page 9, line 22, you see that's where we see the information about the reporting, the various dates that will be reported, and the provision of those reports to KDE and the General Assembly. And then finally on page 13, and I know I'm going through this quickly, but we've talked about this already in the presentation. Just want to make you familiar with where things are located in the E-reg itself. So if we go to page 13, there we are at the bottom. It starts talking and spills over to page 14. That's where you'll see the evidence of the unlimited number of NTI days that the Commissioner of Education may grant to our districts. So those are kind of the highlights of the student attendance regulation. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about that regulation before you consider your vote.
I would add, Madam Chair, that these are obviously, as Todd and others have stated, these are temporary measures intended to just get us through next year. We were very careful to walk a very fine line, trying to give deference and giving deference to the General Assembly and how they, through Senate Bill 177, that these provisions are almost mirror images of the provisions that were provided to districts last semester through Senate Bill 177. I think we all thought, including the General Assembly, that at one point in early March, I think we thought maybe we'd get through this by Derby, and this would not be an issue for the upcoming school year. And the General Assembly Senate Bill 177 just applied to last year. Knowing, obviously, looking back, I'm sure the General Assembly would have had Senate Bill 177 apply moving forward. So instead of trying to do something completely different, there are different ways to go about what we're doing to assist districts. We closely followed Senate Bill 177's model because that's the last time and most recent time that the General Assembly spoke to these issues. And I think it's important when we're acting under, these emergency type orders, the General Assembly is not in place to make these decisions, that we look to them, but then we also listen to our superintendents and school leaders about what they need. And so I think we arrived at a really good place. And then these are, and as I testified yesterday or the day before to the Interim Joint Committee on Education, these are going to be great policy discussion starters when the General Assembly comes back as to lessons learned. Do any of these emergency provisions that we utilize the upcoming school year when the General Assembly comes back in January are any elements do we need to permanently put in our statutory framework? Or maybe if something's not working quite as we thought it might, the General Assembly, obviously coming back in January, can make those decisions. There are a few outstanding issues unrelated to, not as directly related to attendance and funding, but for example, the 170-day minimum required school year and whether or not that should be waived now prior to the school year. It was waived through Senate Bill 177. That's something we're holding back on right now just because we know the General Assembly can address that in January. At the same time, we're still listening to district leaders as to whether or not that needs to be included. So I say all that to say we're continuing to address issues that are arising, and we may have to have you back several more times to either do other emergency regs. We may have to do another memo on some certain things. We're anticipating a memo issuing next week under the governor's authority and then the commissioner's authority acting through the secretary to grant emergency days and to facilitate that for school districts like Senate Bill 177 did. It'd be nice if we were able to do all this in one big package and we could do it 4 weeks ago. The problem is we're in a crisis. We're adjusting. The virus keeps changing, and we're trying to. And as issues come up in districts, we're trying to address them as best we can. So we're going to keep looking at these things, and additional flexibilities may be coming forward.
This is Albus. I have questions for Robin. Robin, has there been any thought given to during this COVID period that since we're using the participation model, there are many kids in the school system that get sick sick and end up getting hospitalized and they can't participate. That's going to drastically affect the funding based on participation that that particular school district would have. Is there any thought as to what we might do in a situation where if I got 25, 30 kids in a school district, they end up in the hospital and they can't participate for a number of days. And then I've got to mark them off as being not able to participate.
Thank you for that question. That's a good question. And let me make clear that the participation and the levels of participation, while of course we want every student to be involved and engaged in instruction, your level of participation does not tie in any way, shape, or form to your funding. So your funding will already be established based upon either your selection of 1819 or 1920 data. So we're looking backwards to a time where the data was more stable for our school districts. And so if we do have the unfortunate incident where we have children that can't participate, that will not impact their funding.
I have a question as well, please, Robin. Is there a protocol in place for students who are not considered in attendance at all? I know there are truancy programs out there and the like when we are in session, but some of this is out of the hand, much of this is out of the hands of our students. Is there a protocol in place for reaching those students?
Yes. So compulsory attendance is still in effect. So DPPs who have statutory duties to follow up on children that are not, in this case, participating rather than attending, they will still kick in their regular requirements to seek out those children. So we don't want this to be construed as those children, those families, and those school district officials still have those responsibilities for educating our children. And so we don't want to leave an impression that by taking away the funding piece, that relieves the obligations of the instruction piece.
Thank you. I felt certain of that, but I wanted to hear that verbalized.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. That is a very, very important question.
I also have an additional one, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm sitting here thinking like a teacher. I have experience with Infinite Campus. I've done attendance on Infinite Campus. Is there a relatively simple method for our children to move within the 3 different structures for our teachers to be able to keep this attendance in place? And by that, I mean in-class participation to NTI would seem relatively easy, but there might be some who move to the virtual learning option as well. Is there a fluid movement throughout that from Infinite Campus, or is it more complicated than I'm afraid I'm about to make it?
From our collection efforts and what we're asking districts to do, you will really just be identifying students as either participating in person or remotely. So the evidence that will be behind that, especially for our remote learning, will be housed at the schools and the districts. And then we will be coming behind them at some point, probably for a sampling or a review of their evidence. But they won't have to put into Infinite Campus each type of evidence and delineate that. While there may be some interest in that, and it's important that we'll be able to learn from that, we were trying to make it as simple as possible for our teachers.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Question. Robin, I have a couple. Since we didn't have the chair call, I didn't get my detail need scratched. Sorry. Can you remind me, or Todd, what happens when an emergency regulation has run its course? Does it expire, or do we take follow-up action?
So Chair Young, that's an excellent question, and both are options. The regulation can naturally expire 270 days after its filing, or the state board could take action to put a permanent regulation in place that would take over prior to the expiration, 270 days after its filing. So in this situation, assuming that we filed the emergency regulation on Monday, it would expire on April 9th. So at that point in time, prior to April 9th, we will need to, potentially take some additional action. At that point in time, the General Assembly will have come into session and may have some action that they will take in that regard. But obviously, we want these provisions to apply to the entirety of the 2021 school year.
And Kevin, forgive me, or Robin, this is a crystal ball question, but are you hearing from districts about what percentage of students they're expecting might not? Do we have?
Anecdotally, I've heard, and Karen and others, maybe we have done some surveys. I'm not sure about the percentage of students, but anecdotally, from superintendents, I've heard as high as 25. At least the first few weeks, and I've heard around 10 as well that are concerned about sending students in. And of course, that can always change. Some of those surveys were done weeks ago. We've had additional rhetoric and commentary at the national level that's affecting this, additional things, and so it's changing. The good news is, though, districts almost to a person, to a superintendent, instead of, they don't want to go to a parent and say, okay, then you just need to withdraw your child, which in a normal time, if a parent was saying, I don't want to send my child in person for whatever reason, that was the option. Districts are saying, we want to meet you where you are. And we understand if you're fearful. We understand if you're living with grandma and grandma has a medical condition, then you're concerned about the student going in and out in a congregate setting. Or we need to do an A-B schedule. Talked to a superintendent this week, and he said, am I off base of doing an A-B schedule, meaning that some of my classes are going to come in Monday, Tuesday, some are going to come in Wednesday, Thursday, or some other combination? I said, absolutely not. That's exactly what we want you to do if that's responding to the needs of your community. And so obviously this hybrid system allows any of those things to work, whether a parent voluntarily keeps their child out or whether the school needs the student to be home for a few days to decrease the number of students in the building to have greater social distancing. I've been very proud of the districts of how they've responded and know that this year is going to be unlike any other, and that we have an obligation to meet kids, parents, families, and communities where they are.
Thank you, Kevin.
And having said that, I would just add the 90%, I would put that up, our participation rate in closing out last year. That's good. I think that's probably better than most states from what we're hearing. 90% is not good enough. We need to be reaching 100% of our kids. That's an equity issue. And we're going to have a resolution on that. That's probably one of the first things we can address and try to address. We also know that even if we have 100% attendance in in-class instruction, we're also not reaching that day 100% of those kids for various reasons. Sometimes it's our own failings. Sometimes it's because what this child is bringing in with him or a combination. And so that is going to be with us, and that challenge, whether or not we're in a pandemic or not.
Excellent. Thank you. And I've been hearing from a lot of superintendents and working with them in co-ops and listening along in their work and hearing that same commitment to ensure that families don't feel like they have to remove their children to homeschool, that we can provide those remote service for kids and families who need them. Board members, before we move to the vote on the first waiver around pupil attendance, if you have any more questions for Robin or anybody on the team on pupil attendance, this would be a good time to get those out there.
This is Jacqueline. I just real quick, I don't have a question, but I just want to thank Kevin and Robin and Kelly and their team, Todd, for all the work that you've done, because obviously these are not easy times, and this virus is not concerned about our convenience. And the fact that you've been able to work with school districts, our school districts are doing such a fantastic job of communicating with parents and students, for the most part, about what's coming, and we're trying to be flexible, and these decisions are helping that. So thank you all for all of this work that you've done, with the statutes, but also with the folks on the ground.
Hear, hear. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I had a question. Perhaps I should already know the answer to this, but whose responsibility is it to go out and collect the paper assignments when kids are not able to participate digitally? Is that a responsibility that falls on the classroom teacher?
Mr. Johnson, this is David Cook again. Actually, in most districts, probably 98% of them, they set up during the spring, and they'll continue it. It's all in their applications for NTI. They have a process by which they have distribution points as well as collection points. In many schools, that collection point is really creative ways of collecting, those newspaper boxes you have in your community where you go pull out the shopper or whatever. They've set those up in the front of the school in the parking lot, and they have a box for each grade or a box for each content area. So the families submit those in an envelope back to the school district at different collection points. That's the way it's done in most school districts. And then the school, probably an assistant principal or somebody, collects those out of those collection boxes and brings them back to the teachers. That's how it's happening in most places.
Thank you.
This is Holly Bloodworth. David, how many students in our state really lack access to internet? Like what kind of numbers are we talking about?
I know, I'm assuming David Couch is on the call. I can let him answer that specifically. Okay. Are you on the call, David, or someone from your office? If not, I can give you the general sense that it's, as far as I remember, it's between 9 and 15% of kids don't have access at home. And as I mentioned in my comments, we're seeing almost all the districts have made that their priority one, to make sure that access is available and to make sure connectivity. So that if it's not, most of them have one-to-one programs now where every kid has access to a device that they can take home. Obviously, in some cases, it's what access they have when they get home. And so I thought I heard somebody jumping on. I don't know if someone from OET is available now to speak.
So does a hotspot work everywhere? Or are there some areas where that still doesn't give them the connection?
As long as the person can get a cell signal, there's usually an ability to make that hotspot work. So it can, I have one in my house that I use as a backup. So that's the way they're designed to work. So you can, it's usually a little box that you just carry around that you sort of set beside your computer. And as long as there's a cell signal in that place, that allows you to connect to the internet.
So maybe my question is, are there areas in our state that do not have cell service?
That is a good question that I can't answer, and I'm taken by the silence that I don't know, Kevin or somebody wants to jump in there.
Well, yes, I'm sitting in one. So yes, or not, at least you have to stand on one leg on the bumper of your car to get it. And to answer your question about access, I've been, David, if you're listening, I've been listening to you, David Couch. It depends on who's doing the survey and who's asking. David Couch has done a really good job in his team over the years of surveying district technology officers, and those numbers are a lot lower when you start diving down into data about kids that have cell phone access but may not have other types of broadband access at home. So when you factor in the cell phone access and or mothers or dads or guardians' cell phone, those numbers are a little lower, meaning that there's a higher percentage that have some type of access. There are some national surveys that show the percentage without is higher, but I don't think they're taking into consideration some of those other access points. I think that's a very high level summary of what David Couch would tell you. The downside, though, is that some of the access points are just not sufficient enough to do everything a child may need to do or access everything we may need them to access, or a parent has limited minutes on phones, limited types of access, and that they can only allow the child to use it for so many minutes of the hour or the day for that access. So those are the other limiting factors.
This is Cody Johnson, and I'm here in Eastern Kentucky, and I have spoken with the Pike County Superintendent and the Floyd County Superintendent, and their numbers are about 30% of their students don't have reliable cell service or internet service. And I know here, like Kevin just said, here in my house, it's the same way. You pretty much have to stand on one leg, be next to a certain window at a certain time to be able to get internet service, and it goes in and out constantly all day long. But that's just anecdotal here.
And I'm going to say that's for our children, but that's for our teachers as well, who are trying to provide some of these services.
Patrice, this is Allison. I was just going to jump in. Back in the spring, I had a very difficult time providing services to my students because where I live, I don't have really good access. We have, one provider for internet service and that's it. So we don't have much choice. And so when it's not working, it's just not working. And there were times I would try to load videos of lessons to my students, and 2 days later it would show up for them. So it definitely was difficult. So we do need to consider our teachers providing the lessons as well as the students getting the lesson.
This is Claire Batt, and I'm wondering a little bit about in our urban areas and the accessibility for our kids, our lower socioeconomic kids. Do we have more data on that and what their access levels are at this point?
Claire, I think it's just what Kevin just said. I think this is David again, David Cook, not David Couch, that we have data on every district. We have a dashboard that shows every district, shows access percentages, connectivity percentages. I would say, again, I'm going back to data from the spring and also applications coming in for the fall for NTI. Our two largest districts and the districts that serve Northern Kentucky, which I would say are our most, quote, urban areas, have done a phenomenal job. If you look back at the things Jefferson County did, for instance, to ensure as many kids as possible had a hotspot if they needed it and had a device if they needed it. As Kevin pointed out, some of the areas we still have to work on are those kids that don't have a home or are very transient. So as much as we can make those things mobile, like hotspots, that's very, very beneficial to everyone, because then the student doesn't have to be in one spot if that is an issue for them. But I think we're doing a pretty decent job of ensuring that, and especially with the CARES money, I think we're going to see a lot of districts beefing up what's available and what's in their, quote, storehouse in the way of devices as well as connectivity points.
And let me piggyback off of what David just said. This is Jacqueline. The gear funding that was the governor's discretionary funds were distributed to schools through the department. And the two uses for that were digital learning and food services, because those were the costs that we saw as the most challenging through this time. And so there is a little extra there that schools have to work with. In terms of access at home, that's obviously a whole nother issue. But I will tell you that within the cabinet, we're working with some folks at KBE, and we're looking regionally at some programs that have been put in place and some things that folks are doing. Northern Kentucky has a program that we're going to look into to provide access. Just to give you one example, Eminent Schools, which is a small school system, a while ago took hotspots and they put them on the buses. And they did that so that kids going back and forth could have access on the bus to internet access to do homework. But then when they realized that the kids didn't have that access at home, they parked the buses around their school district. And then that Wi-Fi service became available through those hotspots because of where the buses were parked. And so that's an innovative idea. And we're looking at some internet access for potentially low-income groups. So we'll be following up with that in a little bit. We're just trying to explore everything that we can possibly do to help folks, and we'll be having hopefully some more coming out on that soon.
And Madam Chair, we have David Couch is on a Kentucky High School Athletic Association board call. I'm not sure if he was able to jump back over here. It's why he was unable to comment. We do have, I think, someone on from OET if you'd like a little 5-minute summary of this topic since it is so important.
I think Associate Commissioner Couch just popped up.
Thanks, Kevin. Kentucky is unique compared to the other 49 states where we've been closely collecting this information of internet access for home for the past 10 or 15 years. And we have two ways we do that. One is when we ask the parents and students directly, and we don't ask in a techno-widget way. We ask them, can you do the following types of things through either wired or wireless connectivity? And a very high percentage of our schools are providing devices that go to their homes. And with the CARES funds, what we're finding, that's really high up on their radar screen. Covington Independent, for example, I think it was one of the examples we were talking about here up in Northern Kentucky, has moved to provide wireless. It's really a whole household issue. It's not really to the home for the student. It's like putting a water line in and saying only the student can use that water line in the house. So it is a whole household type of situation, and that's what Covington has come up with, really the whole Northern Kentucky situation. But Covington Independent Schools already had one-to-one device for their middle school and high school students, but now they're using the CARES funds that they've received to go ahead and get that for elementary school students. We saw the same thing in LaRue County. LaRue County had allowed their high school students to take their devices home. And so through this situation, it's going all the way down to the kindergarten level. And just so you know, because Kentucky is the national leader in cloud-based computing, is the reason the Department of Education was the first state agency to pivot to telecommuting immediately, and also our school districts to be able to extend it, do extended NTI. It's the same kind of reasons that they can access their instructional administrative systems from their homes so quickly within this short period of time compared to the other 49 states. And so we're also addressing the internet cyber safety at home. We're putting something in place that the devices, when they go home, they're going through what we call our internet content management system to make sure those students are staying focused on the right things that they should stay focused in on. But also school districts are taking a closely look now, going back to the connectivity at the home, is we've looked at this for quite some time. And it's been between 9 and 15% when we ask that question. Now, when we ask the parents and the students directly, it's around 9%. But what we find is a bigger part of this issue is not really having an option, because 99% of Kentucky can be you can have internet access to the home through either wired or wireless right now. The wireless option can be delivered through hotspots, as was just mentioned there. It reaches like 99%. So the real issue has been the funding of that. What is the funding source that can be used for that? So the initiative that just happened up in the Northern Kentucky area was you had a couple of charity organizations that said, you know what, we're going to help pay for this school service for a year for the students. So it allowed that, it kind of took away the funding aspect of it. And then really that's one of the biggest pressure points I think we need to put on the telecommunications companies as well as the private sector, is for our low income students, either provided at no cost or a significant discount cost over this next school year. And we can partner with those and make that aware of those private companies or those charity organizations. But that's the way we address it with a very short period of time. Waiting for a last mile wired connection coming to the home could take years or may never happen. So wireless is the best way to reach a very high percentage of Kentucky, nearly 99% plus of Kentucky, and get us ready for the next school year. So the real question is the funding source that can be used in a very short period of time to do that. Districts have the option of using their portion of the CARES funds to help fund those hotspot services. But also we don't want to take pressure off of these companies to provide that at no cost or a significantly reduced cost. So Kevin, I think I kept that underneath 5 minutes. What questions do you have about that? This is a topic we know a lot about. Obviously, Kentucky became the first state to have all of our schools connect to internet. So that's always been a big part of our portfolio. We've always, by the way, had a much higher percentage of our students with smartphones with internet access compared to the other 49 states. We don't know exactly why that is. But one of the reasons I always say is because our students have had it in their schools for so long, they've been more demanding of their parents to have some kind of access to a smartphone with internet access. But we definitely have a percentage that don't have it. But I find that the issue is mainly a funding aspect versus having a technical option aspect.
Thank you, David, and we'll open up a chance for other questions too, but I really appreciate the questions from board members and the feedback from our KDE team in this regard. Kevin opened up the conversation, David, by saying that as we look at these regulations that you and the team, the entire team at KDE are what is meant for us as we think about life post-COVID. And for me, the kind of importance of every child having access to a device and the reliable internet service is becoming a part of what I think we'll be learning in the post-COVID world. Why would a student really have to be absent from school if she has access to class that day device? So I think that's one of those things that we will see as the silver lining that results hopefully in just a few short months.
Yeah, definitely a homebound student needs to be part of the toolbox. They've broken an arm, whatever, this needs to always be part of it. They're just part of the class, even though they can't physically be there that day. I do think it's going to be a permanent part of the toolbox.
And it's fundamentally a question of equity of access, right?
Yes, and opportunity. Yes, absolutely.
Other questions about the pupil attendance emergency regulation waiver?
This is Patrice McCreary. While we have David here still, I have one quick question for you. I applaud the city of Covington and the initiative that they're taking in this area. Do you know who the catalyst of getting this rolling was? Was it civic leaders or was it their board? This is an excellent model.
Oh, yes. Well, Joe Meyer, who is a former senator up there, is now the mayor of Covington, worked with the superintendent who was interested. They had board members interested in solving this. Obviously, the mayor had a community-wide issue that he was trying to address because it's way bigger than K-12, as you know. It affects every aspect of a household. And so that was one aspect. But there's also the other one is the one where we see where I think it's United Way has funded for the service for home. So that's separate from what Covington's done. And I want to say that is 6 or 7 Northern Kentucky school districts along with Cincinnati school districts. So that's the kind of thing that we need because we can't be around waiting for this last mile hard-wired connection to go to a home. There's a way to address it very quickly through these types of approaches.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and thanks so much for this important conversation. We'll move on then, and as this is an emergency regulation, a second reading will not occur, nor is it required by law. So, board members, do a motion to waive a second and approve 702 KAR 7:125 pupil attendance regulation.
This is Albus Johnson. I'll make that motion.
Thank you. We have a motion from Mr. Johnson. Do we have a second?
Sharon Robinson, I second.
Thank you. We have a motion from a second from Dr. Robinson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Jennifer, please call the roll.
Joanne Adams.
This is Joanne Adams. I vote yes.
Claire Batt.
Claire Batt votes yes.
Holly Bloodworth.
This is Holly Bloodworth. I vote yes.
Alvis Johnson.
This is Alvis Johnson. I vote yes.
Patrice McCrary.
This is Patrice McCrary, and I vote yes.
Cody Johnson.
Cody Johnson, and I vote yes.
Sharon Robinson.
Sharon Robinson, I vote yes.
Lee Todd.
This is Lee Todd, and I vote yes.
And Lou Young.
This is Lou Young, and I vote yes.
Thank you, Chair.
The next item on our agenda is the amendment to 702 KAR 3:270E SEEK funding formula. You heard the presentation from Robin on that, but perhaps, Robin, we should walk through the regulation or whatever, however you want to take us forward on this second waiver consideration, please.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Thank you very much, Chair Young. If I can ask Joette to pull up the regulation itself and turn us to page 4 of the regulation. And I'll quickly go over on the regulation itself, sort of the highlights. Starting at the top of page 4, line 3.
And board members, this is also in your portal if you're having trouble seeing the screen.
Yeah. And really the important pieces of this regulation are really all found on page 4, starting on line 5. And you'll see that in this applies only to the 2021 school year. In section 3, as far as the SEEK calculation formula, this is the portion that talks about the selection by our districts of either the 1819 or 1920 data that will be used for the next school year for funding. And just quickly, it doesn't specify in there, but as a quick review of what we are talking about when we talk about the components of SEEK that are utilizing ADA, that includes the ADA itself, end of year, at risk, home hospital, and SEEK transportation are all included in that. And then you'll also see at line 15, I believe it is, that funds that are for other state funding based in whole or in part on average daily attendance will also rely upon that prior 1819, 1920 data count. And so that pulls in some of our large line items. Those are our grant programs for after school services, ESS, Safe Schools, and KETS will all use that. Since we won't have a more current year ADA, we'll rely upon that 1819, 1920 data to help us with the calculations. And then finally on line 13 of the same page, it talks about how we will still use current year data for some of the other components of our calculations. This is very similar how we're going to conduct the current school year. So property assessments will be based upon the current year property assessments, district tax, exceptional child counts, and LEP student counts, and state equalization. None of those are dependent upon AADA, and so we'll use current year counts and data for those calculations. So I'll pause there. Those are really the important components. That regulation is fairly lengthy, but you'll see that we have moved all this information to the front on page 4, and then that allows us to strike through the significant portions of the rest of the regulation itself.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robin. Board members, do you have questions for the team around the waiver of the regulation regarding the SEEK fund in this emergency status? All right, thank you. Robin, so thank you. And as this is an emergency regulation, a second reading will not occur, nor is it required. Do I have a motion to waive a second reading and approve 702 KAR 3:270E SEEK funding formula regulation?
This is Patrice McCrary, and I so move.
We have a motion by Ms. McCreary. Do we have a second?
This is Holly. I second.
Thank you. We have a second by any further discussion? Hearing none, Jennifer, please call the roll.
Joanne Adams.
This is Joanne Adams. I vote yes.
Claire Batt.
This is Claire Batch. I vote yes.
Holly Bloodworth.
This is Holly Bloodworth. I vote yes.
Alvis Johnson.
This is Alvis Johnson. I vote yes.
Patrice McCrary.
This is Patrice McCrary, and I vote yes.
Cody Johnson.
This is Cody Johnson, and I vote yes.
Sharon Robinson.
This is Sharon Robinson. I vote yes.
Lee Todd.
This is Lee Todd, and I vote yes.
And Lou Young.
This is Lou Young, and I vote yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jennifer. The next item on our agenda is another waiver, approval 2 of 705 to equalization of funding for locally operated area vocational centers and vocational departments. With us today are KBE Associate Commissioner David Horstman, Assistant Director Kylie Whitaker, and Policy Advisor Leslie Slaughter, who will tell us about the waiver of Section 5.2 of Administrative Reg 705 KAR 2:140 in light of COVID-19 and the potential funding impact on local school districts. This waiver would eliminate LAVEC budget uncertainties, locally operated area vocational center budget uncertainties for the 2020-2021 school year, and allow school districts to know their final budget prior to the start of the school year. David, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. This morning we bring forward a request to waive a portion of 705 KAR 2:140. The Office of Career and Technical Education distributes funds to 42 districts that operate career and technical centers. Mr. Kylie Whitaker, our Assistant Director from the Office of Career and Technical Education, manages this process. Kylie will walk you through the details of this request and answer any questions. Kylie?
Thanks, David. Do you mind if we pull up the one slide that I have for this? while I'm waiting for that one slide to come up, I just want to give you a really quick synopsis of what we're asking for. We're basically asking that we use prior year data that is final and consistent across the state, as opposed to using current year data to determine funding allocations for our locally operated centers. The main reason we're doing this is because with so many of our labs, we are not sure how many students, due to social distancing, are going to be able to be in a lab at the same time. How many students are actually going to be able to be transported on buses to many of these locally operated centers. Some of these locally operated centers are located within the high school, and they could not have to deal with some of the difficulties and barriers that our centers that are off campus are going to have to deal with transportation. And due to so many uncertainties about the class sizes and everything, we would feel more comfortable using prior year data, and we would feel more comfortable giving the school a better sense of what their budget's going to be for the school year, as opposed to looking at Section 5.2 there, making final allocations based on current year, which could have dramatic effects on a current a tentative budget. So just really bluntly, we could have schools that take $150,000 cut or more mid-year from the budget they thought they were going to have due to current year data just being different, and so many uncertainties and so many chances for students to not be able to be in these labs situations. So in essence, that is really what we're asking for here, is to use current year or prior year data that we have faith and confidence in and that's fair, and to go ahead and give schools a final budget now, as opposed to waiting all the way until mid-year to tell them what their final budget's going to be and not knowing what that's going to look like mid-year. And I'm happy to answer questions. I'm absolutely happy to give you a lot more detail, but I like to keep it short and simple unless you have questions for me.
Thank you, Kylie. Board members, do you have questions about the locally operated area vocational center waiver request?
My only question, this is Holly, is how different was last year's data from the previous year? I mean, how much was last year's, impacted by COVID?
So last year's data is not impacted by COVID because it's based on term 1 data, which is the fall, which we did not have the COVID situation in during the fall.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve the waiver.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson. So we have a motion to approve waiver of Section 5.2 of Administrative Regulation 705 KAR 2:140. Do we have a second?
This is Holly Bloodworth. I second.
Okay, I have a second from Joanne this time. Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Thank you. Jennifer.
Joanne Adams.
This is Joanne Adams. My vote is yes.
Claire Batt.
This is Claire Batt. I vote yes.
Holly Bloodworth.
This is Holly Bloodworth. I vote yes.
Alvis Johnson.
This is Alvis Johnson. I vote yes.
Patrice McCrary.
This is Patrice McCrary, and I vote yes.
Cody Johnson.
This is Cody Johnson, and I vote yes.
Sharon Robinson.
This is Sharon Robinson. I vote yes.
Lee Todd.
This is Lee Todd, and I vote yes.
And Lou Young.
This is Lou Young, and I vote yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. And before we wrap up this conversation about the COVID-related waivers, I want to echo Lieutenant Governor Coleman's comment about our sincere thanks to Kevin and all of the associate commissioners and the KDE team members who are with us today for the proactive way you've thought about moving into the fall and with school reopening. And Commissioner Brown did say that he would be happy to answer some questions or to just address the issue of teacher attendance. And we know that this is all unfolding in real time, but several board members, myself included, have been hearing from teachers about what schools and districts can be thinking about to support them this fall. So Kevin, if you would, a brief update before we finish the COVID conversation, please. And you may be muted.
We may have lost him, Chair Young. Let me text him and see.
Oh, he is in the country. Oh, there he is.
Oh, there he is. Yep. Good.
Hi, Kevin.
I got dropped.
Yeah, we lost you for a minute right when I was tossing the ball to you.
I think you were going to toss it to me to talk about some other flexibility issues and concerns. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We've been hearing mostly from teachers in the last week or so as things have unfolded, and just wanted an update. And again, we give you all kinds of grace in terms of knowing that these things are unfolding in real time, but any updates that you could share about how districts are working with their adults, teachers, and staff in preparing for the fall.
Sure. We know there's a lot of anxiety out there, everyone, in communities, in parents, students, but also teachers, and we're seeing a lot on social media, of course, and there's been a lot of national articles. This is a national issue, if not a worldwide issue, concerns about coming back into classrooms and trying to do what's best for students and their learning, also trying to do what's best for everyone's health and achieve that balance. I had a similar question to this past week at the Interim Joint Committee on Education about concerns from teachers and about, for example, a teacher in a classroom that may have a underlying medical condition, and then the worry of students not being compliant with keeping masks on, or even inadvertently or inadvertently, trying to give a teacher a hug or whatever it may be. All of those concerns are valid. Don't have, unfortunately, a lot of answers to some of those concerns, other than we know that we're going to try to do, and with working with public health, they have indicated we've got to make our best effort to try to do follow the guidelines and do what's best in our buildings. And so we're asking districts to first take a look at, and this is in the guidance that was issued 2 weeks ago, the public health guidance issued in conjunction with KDE that we're calling the flagship guidance that talks about social distancing and the mask wearing and other ways to be healthy at school. We're first asking districts to evaluate your buildings, evaluate your class sizes, look for ways to spread out your students. The ideal scenario is bringing students back with 6 feet or greater distancing during class time, spreading out class change.
I think we may have lost him.
He needs to get on the other leg. You're standing on the wrong leg. Yeah, go to the other leg now.
We did lose you for a second there, Kevin.
This has been, I've had such great success here at the farm since March, and so I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm saying that what I was saying is we're asking districts to make their best effort to evaluate their buildings. The ideal situation is try to spread students out, achieve that 6 feet distancing. The next best thing and is
Okay, let's give him a chance to jump back in when he can.
Lou, this is Kelly. I'll give you an update on the guidance documents real quick that kind of ties into this, just to kind of update everyone. To date, we have released 11 guidance documents, and we have and we have 4 additional ones that'll be coming out over the rest of the month. So, as Kevin mentioned, the Healthy at Schools document that we worked with public health on is kind of the flagship, where it gives local districts the guidelines that they'll need to work with their district reopening teams and when determining about students on the bus and class changes and how they need to set up their classrooms and feed their kids. And then the other documents, cross-agency team at KBE has been putting guidance together, a wide range of topics, anything from social emotional learning to teaching and learning, how to evaluate your students when they come back to determine their learning needs, food service, career and tech ed, facilities. So lots of hard work across the agency on producing those guidance documents. And those go out every Monday, and then we share those on the Tuesday superintendent webcast with superintendents. So 11 documents have gone out, and we have several more that will be coming out over the next few weeks.
Excellent, thank you. And I know that Kevin will be keeping us updated as much as possible about those things, as well as you, Kelly, as these things do unfold. So thank you, really appreciate it. And board members, you may see a note in the chat from Regina. It seems like there are some overall internet issues for many of us today. So as a reminder, you do have the option of turning off your incoming video, which doesn't mean that your video won't be on, but you won't see the other incoming video, and that is available in your toolbar. I'm going to try that as well. It seems like my audio was a little bit choppy too.
Chair Young, this is Patrice McCrary. Could
yes.
I make a comment right here?
Please.
We have so much facing us in the Commonwealth as far as starting back up this school year. And of course, we want our children to get back in the classroom for so many different reasons. But at the same time, just as an example, this past week, I have spoken with a mom who has gone through cancer and has an immune compromised child at home who is a teacher. I have visited with a single mother who is the sole responsible person for her children and has got to stay well. At the same time, she's concerned about what if she does get ill and there's no substitute to step in for her. I've also spoken with a teacher who is completing her chemo treatment, who is still working, still trying to be in that classroom. We have got to remember our teachers, our staff, our individuals who are going out, and we've got to keep them safe at the same time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Patrice. And I know that those kind of burdens are heavy on the hearts of all of the leaders who are trying to make these reopening plans. So again, as we keep an eye on what happens over the coming weeks, also encouraging teachers and staff to be working really, really closely and in close contact with their district superintendents and HR folks about those health concerns for this fall. Thank you.
Dr. Young, is there any more that we need to be considering? I heard Patrice mention a situation this morning where perhaps the superintendent said, if you don't report, I'm going to fire you. I mean, is there anything additionally that we need to be doing as a board? I mean, that seems like a pretty harsh predicament to be in. I'm health compromised, or I got a kid, and I just don't want to go, and you tell me I'm going to lose my job if I don't show up. Is there something as a board we need to be addressing here?
Right, that is, of course, harsh, and those are the kinds of things that we want to get more information on when we hear those kinds of reports. Todd, I don't know if you want to add anything here, but one of the things I can do is Kevin and I will talk about how we can keep you updated, and I know that Todd and Kevin are always kind of scanning, just like the waivers that came before us today, Mr. Johnson, about anything that we need to do to support students as they come back this fall and adults as well.
If I can, I think I'm back on. I've reset everything and
sound great.
turned off incoming video and on one leg here. So we are, and I'm not sure what was covered. I apologize if I repeat it, but we are going to be, and we've been working with the Lieutenant Governor, and we're going to be issuing a memo next week extending the emergency leave provisions that were contemplated by Senate Bill 177. And then I've asked the legal team to work on a memo or a short guidance document that summarizes the other various leave provisions that are afforded to school district employees, not just their normal leave, the emergency leave that will be granted under Senate Bill 177 that will be under the jurisdiction of a local board to grant. But then there's also some emergency FMLA leave provisions that are still on the books from the congressional action when COVID started. And so that applies to school districts in certain circumstances and school employees. And there's still a lot of confusion out there, as there should be, because it's a confusing issue in personnel and employment law anyway, outside of the pandemic, and can get complicated about leave. And so we're going to be providing some guidance to districts, and we've also asked KSBA to continue providing guidance as they traditionally do to local school board council and their members as well. So doesn't answer the questions, but know that we understand this is an issue, and we're going to be trying to provide additional guidance and clarification. And then if we need additional flexibilities, that's always on the table.
Excellent, thank you, and you sounded great.
Chair Young, this is Allison.
Yes.
A lot of people have really been reaching out to me in the last few days. The mindset has kind of taken a change for teachers, as Patrice mentioned, very much concerned about their safety, their family safety, and the children's safety in the last few days. Just even today, I've had several people reach out to me with concern that local school boards and schools having professional development going back into school, and even our board meetings are still virtual, but yet we're planning for schools to go back in face to face. And there's a concern of that is, why are we still being virtual and meetings still being virtual when then we're asking and planning for teachers and employees to go back into school. So I know there's still several, a few weeks left before the first schools go back into session, and lots of things can change between now and then, but I did tell them that I would make sure to bring that topic up to the board today to see if there was anything we could discuss about that.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison, and thank you, everyone. And Kevin, I know we'll be meeting more times in the coming weeks, so would appreciate those continued updates.
This is Claire Bad, and I'd also like to bring up an issue that a number of people have addressed with me. One is the quality of the PPE that will be provided, reuse, what types of PPE, and the costs associated with providing the PPE to teachers and other school personnel. The other issue is, if a teacher or school personnel were to become sick, the cost associated with that, would that be covered under workers' comp, or is that going to be under the individual's health care? And the excessive costs associated sometimes with treatment of someone who is terribly ill. Those were concerns that people would like addressed.
I think Robin Kinney can certainly address the PPE issue, the distribution, the quality, how that's becoming available through state contracts as well as through other purchasing mechanisms in districts. So Robin, if you can handle that one. The issue about workers' comp, is probably an issue of first impression and very good one. So not sure we have an answer to that, but I'll defer to Todd on that one. So Robin, can you quickly answer the PPE one?
Sure, I'll be glad to try to tackle that one. The PPE, I think it's a good question about the cost of it, and it will, it will impact school districts as far as additional expenditures. They can use their CARES Act money, and I know we say this over and over. We talk about using CARES Act for this or that or the other. So they can use their CARES Act money for those costs of PPE. We have also been in contact and had available on our superintendent webcast a couple of weeks ago a lady from emergency management, Kentucky Emergency Management, and representing and talking to districts about eligibility under FEMA. And we have encouraged our districts to apply as applicants. That group is now emergency management through their contractor working through FEMA are now scheduling individual meetings with each local school district to advise them of eligibility and also talk to them about possible eligible reimbursement expenses for that. We also heard some good news last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, from the Department for Public Health about thermometers. And you may have seen that through our partnership with the Department for Public Health and the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, we are distributing this week to our local school districts no-touch thermometers, about 12,500 thermometers going to local school districts. So we are looking at every possible fund source to assist our districts as far as access to those PPE requirements. And then we'll also be posting, we are collecting any information from state available contracts to be added to our COVID-19 website. Districts have always been afforded the opportunity to purchase off of state master agreements, but that is not a familiar place for our school districts to turn to. So we're going to create a link off of our COVID-19 website to kind of help them with accessibility to things.
Excellent, thank you. I really appreciate the nimble way that the team is able to answer our questions on the spot today. So thanks so much for that. And I know we'll be getting more updates. As Kevin said, it's a pandemic. So we have lots of questions that come out of all of the anxiety that's out in the field and in our communities right now. So we really appreciate those updates. And Jennifer, if you will help me before.
I think I may have missed. I know the question that we're not going to be able to answer is it's a great question about workers' comp and healthcare. It's I'm sure an issue of first impression, but we will flag that. And then I think, Claire, there was a third question that I don't know that we answered. And I don't remember what that was. Third part of your question. Or did we cover it?
Claire, you're muted.
I think you covered most of it. I think the quality of PPE and considering that hospitals are still complaining about inaccessibility of adequate PPE supplies is, I know we've sort of gone around the issue, but I think it's of a very heightened concern among many teachers' minds. And so I think that assurance is really going to be critical to people feeling comfortable coming back and being on the front line with kids.
It's good.
And Claire, sorry, Kevin, let me just say this. We've been working very closely with the department and recognize that funding is obviously an issue. And if we're asking folks to have masks and to keep them on and to have the things they need to stay safe, sorry, that's Evelyn in the background. We need to also try to provide every support that we can. And so that's why I've written a letter to every top education official in the other states and asked them to join me in my letter to the Secretary of Education in DC. And I'm also going to send it to the entire Kentucky delegation, talking about the importance of funding for PPE. And my point was, if our teachers have been flexible, if our schedules have been flexible, if our families and our students have been flexible, then our education funding should also be during this time, because we don't know what's coming. And I know that this could go without saying, but I want to make sure I mention it. We, in every conversation we have, yes, we talk about teachers because they're going to be the ones that have the most impact with kids from their communities. But we also need to be very mindful of all of our classified folks who are driving the buses and serving the meals and those types of things that, they need it just as badly. And so I promise, I know Kevin Brown has been working on this tirelessly and continues to talk about it with his team, and they're doing the best they can. So we're going to keep doing the best we can, and we're going to keep trying to provide everything we can to our districts.
Excellent. Again, thank you everyone for the discussion and for all the responses you were able to share today. And I'll ask Jennifer to work with me to give you guys a chance to pose questions around COVID-related reopening issues whenever we're having another meeting coming up, so we can get you as many definitive responses to those in advance. I know I had talked to Cody 2 weeks ago about 5-year-olds and masks, and I know that's all evolving as well, but we'll try to keep you as informed, knowing that you're hearing from folks all across your regions as well. So thank you. And as we continue into internal board business and look at the next item on our agenda, that is a discussion and action on a statement by the Kentucky Board of Education on a commitment to educational equity and racial justice in Kentucky public schools. Joette is going to share the resolution on the screen. And before I actually read that aloud to you, I want to thank friend and colleague from Jefferson County Schools, Principal Rhonda Cosby, who first shared with me a statement from the Virginia State Board of Education and challenged me to think about doing the same for here in Kentucky. And I was really moved by what I read in the Virginia resolution, and also felt that Rhonda's challenge was an important one for us to take up as a team here in Kentucky as well. So many thanks to those who helped draft the resolution that we are going to be considering for approval here today. And a special thanks to our Vice Chair, Dr. Robinson, for her wisdom and her sage advice as we have developed this resolution for our board's consideration. At this time, I will read the resolution, and then we will open up for any discussion or feedback from board members. A resolution of the Kentucky Board of Education affirming its commitment to racial equity in Kentucky public schools. Whereas the vision of the Kentucky Board of Education is to ensure that each student is empowered and equipped with the knowledge and skills to be successful in a complex and competitive world. Whereas the Kentucky Board of Education resolutely stands against all acts of racism and violence. Whereas this unique and historic moment in our country's evolution presents an opportunity and a challenge for all of us to be part of creating a better educational community for students, and importantly, for African American students and students of color. Whereas our Commonwealth's public schools have a history of racial inequity. Even today, students and staff of color, particularly African American students and staff, are often left out of the conversation and remain unheard. Whereas academic achievement gaps prove to be pernicious challenges that have not been successfully eliminated. Even with the progress we have made in recent decades with increases in achievement overall, there has been no significant reduction in closing such gaps between racial groups. In fact, in some school districts, gaps have widened. Whereas the Kentucky Board of Education is committed to delivering on its core promises to every member of our public school system. Every child deserves a high-quality education. Every staff member deserves to be respected in the workplace. Every voice deserves to be heard. Whereas we believe that educational leaders must embrace diversity, assure equality, and shape the future of all of Kentucky's children. The Kentucky Board of Education is dedicated to tackling racism through support of inclusionary teacher preparation programs that put highly qualified teachers of color in front of students and school improvement options for local districts to close achievement gaps. Whereas every student in the Commonwealth deserves equitable access to excellent educators who have unique experiences and perspectives, quality preparation, and are committed to the success of all learners. Kentucky's education leaders have a shared responsibility to deliver a high-quality education to all students. Together, with deliberate action and shared commitment, we can deliver on that promise. Whereas the initiatives that promote the development of a teaching population that reflects the makeup of the student population have fallen woefully short. According to the Kentucky School Report Card, Kentucky's African American teacher workforce during the 2018-19 school year was a mere 3.33%. That percentage is conspicuously low when compared to Kentucky's African American student population at 10.6%. Whereas, pursuant to KRS 158.649 and 703 KAR 5:225, every school in Kentucky must annually develop, review, and revise a comprehensive school improvement plan that includes biennial targets, strategies, activities, and a time schedule calculated to eliminate the achievement gap among various groups of students to the extent that such a gap exists. Accordingly, the Kentucky Department of Education must provide districts and schools with knowledge, resources, and technical assistance for their use, and to monitor them in planning and implementation of their strategies and activities to help close the achievement gap. Whereas we acknowledge that the Commonwealth must make a concerted effort to address the social and emotional health of our students and staff. As we confront the convergence of serious racial unrest and a global pandemic, we know that many members of our education family, children, youth, and adults, will return to school this fall experiencing some level of trauma. Mental health must be at the forefront of all our decision-making. Whereas we stand firm in these beliefs and are resolved to bring about meaningful change in all Kentucky public schools, without such change, socioeconomic and racial opportunity gaps that have existed for decades will undoubtedly continue. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Kentucky Board of Education will amplify our voice in support of minority students, their families, and minority educators. We will not only listen to their concerns and aspirations, but we pledge to leverage those concerns and aspirations to inform our actions. Be it resolved that we call on educators, schools, and districts to commit to listening to those seeking to be heard, and to ensure that young people of color feel valued and safe in school and the community. We challenge our schools, districts, local boards of education, educational cooperatives, parents and families, and communities to join together to break down the barriers that stand between our students of color and the equitable education they deserve. We envision a future where all educational leaders actively engage minority voices within their communities to influence decisions. Be it resolved that we urge all schools to examine the Kentucky Framework of Best Practices for School Counselors, released by the Kentucky Department of Education on June 2nd, 2020. This framework is the first of its kind in the Commonwealth and helps to reimagine and realign the roles and responsibilities of school counselors so they can better meet the immediate needs of our students. We call on all education personnel to focus on the mental health needs of our students, provide more individual and small group counseling services, and increase care for the whole child, because we know that a child who is hurting cannot learn. Be it resolved, the Kentucky Board of Education asks the Kentucky General Assembly to recommit to the provisions of KRS 161.165, which outlines the importance of diversifying the teacher workforce by restoring funding for programs like the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching, KAET. The KAET is dedicated to recruiting and retaining minority teachers. Be it resolved, the Kentucky Board of Education encourages education leaders across the Commonwealth to examine policies, procedures, and funding decisions to ensure children of every race have equal access to educational opportunities. We urge district leaders to think unconventionally and innovatively to serve all students, because conventional methods clearly have not yielded the results we need. To dismantle racism in our schools and to ensure that educational equity becomes reality for every Kentucky learner in every Kentucky classroom. Be it resolved, the Kentucky Board of Education calls on our Commissioner of Education to continue and reinvigorate the work of the Kentucky Department of Education to foster a culture of anti-racism and further racial equality within our public schools. So having presented that draft, I'd like to open up for any discussion on the part of board members before we consider approval of our resolution.
Chair Young?
Yes.
I'd like to ask my fellow board members as they contemplate this resolution to think about the kind of leadership that we want to provide, certainly to the Commonwealth, but also the kind of conviction and backdrop we want to provide our incoming commissioner. We are at a time where we probably can try some things we've never tried before, because we are experiencing conditions that are brand new. So it will require a measure of innovation and courage on all our part. So I felt it was rising to the challenge of our chair to craft such a message. I felt it was important for us to make sure that not just our hands were on it, but our arms were all around it, our heads deep in it, and our hearts thoroughly committed. So it is the message that we send to our community and to our incoming commissioner that this is the agenda, because this is now an aspect of quality that has never been more forcefully required of us all.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Robinson, for the conviction and for the heart and for such a well-articulated message.
Madam Chair, this is Aaron Thompson. 2 or 3 points. Obviously, I appreciate this at this time for a lot of reasons, being an African-American educator in a state I love so well. Making this statement is important not just as a reaction, number 2, but this has to be a proactive way we think about doing our business, and the charge for the new commissioner and others has to be with this solidly in mind. This is just not about diversity. This is not just about inclusion and equity. This is about the core values of this state, what we stand for, and how we then look at ourselves as we move into the future to become a better Kentucky and a more whole Kentucky. And number 3, just from an aspect of representing higher education, the idea that we all need to do more, including higher education, to think about education truly is the route to not only personal success, but it's the route to an understanding of what it means to have an educated economy, have an educated workforce, and how to have a civic input that matters to our future. And so my argument goes along with Vice Chair Robinson's in that this is a charge. This is not just a resolution or a statement. This is a charge. And that I would ask us to think about using assessment and process to see how well over the next many years we're living up to this charge. So thank you on the board.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson.
And this is,
Yes, Mr. Johnson.
yeah, you know, I want to echo what some of Dr. Robinson and Mr. Thompson said. You know, it is incumbent upon us as a Board of Education, if we are truly serious. I mean, we're going to vote to adopt this thing today, but are we adopting it because it's something on paper? Is it something, or because it's something we're going to be committed to? The new commissioner, whoever it is going to have to get some instructions from us as a board to let that person know how serious we are about what we're putting in this resolution. Because I'm going to vote to abstain if we're not individually serious as a board about what we're going to put in this resolution. You know, I've thought long and hard about this, and as an African American, you know, I want to know. I know our Lieutenant Governor has stated unequivocally that the time is now for us to check ourselves on our focus and our attention to inclusions and diversity. And I just want to make that statement on the record that, you know, I can vote for this if we as a board are serious about taking every opportunity we can to encourage our new commissioner to implement those things down the road that's going to help us achieve the equity and to eliminate the racial prejudice and injustice that all of us know that still exists in our state. And I appreciate you all listening to me. So
thank you so much, Mr. Johnson. And I would stand with you in that call that when we do the roll call vote today, this is not just a vote to approve a resolution, but that I hope each board member heard from Mr. Johnson to know that we are voting and committing to working with our commissioner to do this work and to be a more equitable, just board and department and public education system.
Madam Chair, I would like to add too that first of all, I appreciate the use of the word reinvigorate in the call and the charge to the department. What the word says to me is it also recognizes that we have been doing some things. It also recognizes and points out that what we've been doing is not enough, and we need to be doing more. And I don't think this is, I think as an interim, even though I may only be here another week or another 6 weeks, depending on when the new commissioner arrives, I have an obligation as well. As you know, we have put in place some guidance documents in June related to race-based trauma of our students. And we're going to be taking action in the next few weeks to implement and lay the groundwork for implicit bias training first of KDE employees as a series, not as just a one-time training, but as a series, and working that into our monthly KDE meetings, which I'm sure the new commissioner will continue, and then also the charge from the Lieutenant Governor about implicit bias training in our schools. I have an obligation to go ahead and get that work started, even though we know we have a new commissioner here. And then my charge to the team that I will be leaving behind is this is a resolution that needs to be dog-eared, and the edges need to be worn, and there need to be notes on it, because it is a charge, as Dr. Thompson says, and a chart and a great instruction for us as we move forward. And I'll also be taking it with me where I go after KDE. So I want to thank the board for it.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Brown.
Chair Young, this is Lee Todd. Commissioner just mentioned that it was a charge to the department, but as Elvis and the previous speakers have said, it's a charge to us as well. And it is high time. And we talk about having made progress with CARA test score measurements early on, and we're on a plateau now, and we want to lift that up. But we haven't talked about the education gap that has existed for far longer than that, and some of the practices that have been in place for longer than that need as much attention. My question when we get into this is, who's going to wake up in the morning worried about getting this done? If you don't have somebody whose full-time focus is on an issue such as this, it's not going to happen. And it is a charge to the entire department and ourselves, but it's got to be some way. There's a structure that has to do teacher recruiting, has to do gap analysis, has to be out there, like Sharon said, looking for innovative ways that some districts are already possibly using to make some headway. And if somebody's doing something right, let's be very well aware of that. But that's my question, and the new commissioner, I think, would have to talk to us about what structure are you going to put in place in order to have somebody who, when they get up in the morning and go to bed at night, they're still worried about making this resolution real.
Excellent. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Todd, and that will be part of that conversation in charge that I think is becoming really clear.
Chair Young, this is Allison. I would just like to say that, going over this resolution and a yay or nay at the end of this, but I want to rest assured to everyone on the board that I am beyond proud to be part of a board and do the work with you and stand beside you. And there are plenty of teachers and school employees that have reached out to me since our first discussion on this that are ready to get on board and do this work. So I think we definitely have the support across the state. But I'm very proud to be part of this and ready to do the hard work to it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Allison, for your commitment.
Chair Young, it's Patrice McCrary. First of all, I would like to say the heart and soul that was poured into this is greatly appreciated. So Chair Young, thank you. Vice Chair Robinson, thank you. My heart was tugged throughout the reading of this. My intent is to print this out and put it within my board information and read it not only on a regular basis, but certainly before each meeting that we have to remain focused on the words within it. I hope every individual involved in education reads this and can take it to heart just as strongly. Thank you for the time and effort you two put into this.
Thank you, Patrice.
Madam Chair, this is Joanne Adams.
Yes, Joanne.
I'd just like to reaffirm my devotion to furthering racial equality in our state. And when we all took our oath as board members, we vowed to work for all the children of this state. And when we see that there are children who are in special need, who are hurting, and who are in trauma now, we need to make sure that those children are a special.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ms. Adams. And I think everyone is rising to Mr. Johnson's challenge to make sure that this is a sincere and genuine commitment on our hearts.
Chairman Young, this is Claire Batten, I too would like to thank you for making this a priority for our board. The reason I got into education in the beginning was because of the inequity that I saw in our prison system and the injustice of people who never really had the opportunity and were forced to live a life that did not allow them to become the person that they could be. And I think that as a board member, I am fully committed to ensuring this resolution is upheld.
Thank you so much, Ms. Batt. All right, thank you very much, board, for engaging in this work and for those very heartfelt comments as we move forward. Thank you. And at this time, with thanks to Dr. Robinson, to Tracy Goff Herman, to Todd Allen, to Jennifer Fraker, to Tony Cons-Tatman, and to Damian Sweeney, and many others at the department for their work on putting this all together, and especially to Commissioner Brown. Do I have a motion to approve the board resolution affirming its commitment to racial equity in Kentucky public schools?
This is Holly Bloodworth. I move that we adopt this resolution.
And Patrice McCrary, I second that.
Thank you. We have a motion from Ms. Bloodworth and a second from Ms. McCrary. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Jennifer, please call the roll.
Joanne Adams.
This is Joanne Adams. My vote is yes.
Claire Batt.
Claire Batt, I vote yes.
Holly Bloodworth.
This is Holly Bloodworth. I vote yes.
Alvis Johnson.
This is Elvis Johnson. I vote yes.
Patrice McCrary.
This is Patrice McCrary. My vote is yes.
Cody Johnson.
Cody Johnson, my vote is yes.
Sharon Robinson.
Sharon Robinson, my vote is yes.
Lee Todd.
Yeah. This is Lee Todd, and I do vote yes.
And Lou Young.
And this is Lou Young. I vote yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jennifer. At this time, we will move to our announcement of the new Commissioner of Education. I am pleased to publicly announce that Dr. Jason Glass has been identified by the KBE as Kentucky's next Commissioner of Education, following a very extensive and productive national search. Throughout this process, I have been overwhelmed by the integrity of the process and the quality of applicants for the position of Commissioner. I'd like to take a moment to publicly thank Betty Asher and her team from Greenwood Asher, who are on this call, for their services and support through this search. Despite the extremely impressive qualifications and sincere dedication to public education we saw in so many outstanding candidates for the position, Dr. Glass's extensive experience, including having served as Chief State School Officer in Iowa and as a school superintendent with urban, suburban, and rural school communities, along with a strategic vision and a track record for moving a school transformation agenda at the state policy level, combined to make him a great fit for the Commonwealth. Following our meetings on Monday and Tuesday, I've been in touch with Dr. Glass. We have had an opportunity to discuss the salary and benefits he would receive while serving as commissioner, as well as what the KBE can offer commensurate with Dr. Glass's experience and credentials, while remaining good stewards of the Commonwealth's limited public education funds. Dr. Glass is excited about the opportunity to serve as commissioner and partner to the KBE as we work to advance public education for all students in the Commonwealth. And I am certainly excited to welcome this native Kentuckian home to begin the tough but rewarding work we have ahead. I'm pleased to announce that Dr. Glass and I have worked together and developed an employment contract that I believe will be acceptable to the full board. I'm circulating the contract I propose for adoption by the board and will ask Jennifer to schedule a special call meeting for the purpose of adopting this contract. Board members, Jennifer will be in touch with you in the coming days to schedule a meeting. At this time, Dr. Glass has joined us virtually, and I'm excited to welcome Jason to our team and to give you the opportunity to make a few remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair and honorable members of the board. It's great to see all of you again. First and foremost, I'd just like to commend the Board of Education for the resolution that you just passed that affirms the board's commitment to racial equity in Kentucky's public schools. If we're to live up to our ideals, then racism has no place in our great state or nation. As educators, we're professionally committed to breaking down barriers and to creating opportunities for our students. And as leaders, we're in a unique position to enact powerful change because our decisions have a direct impact on the future. We have a moral obligation to expand the opportunities for every child. Members of the board, I want you to hear that as your commissioner, and I want you to hear this clearly, that I'm committed to taking on this important work of anti-racism and equity within all of Kentucky's public schools. Together, we will stand in solidarity against any and all acts of racism, disrespect, and inequitable treatment based on race. And our best evidence that we truly mean what we say on this matter will be taking action. Members of the board, I'm so incredibly grateful for this opportunity to serve the Commonwealth, and I'm excited to embark on this effort to improve the future for all of Kentucky's children. Our world has become faster, more globally interconnected, more competitive, and these things are not slowing down, they are accelerating. And we have to adapt our education system so that we prepare our students to meet those challenges. In spite of all of our present struggles, and I heard you talk about several of them today, we have a lot of present struggles. In spite of that, I believe in Kentucky, and I believe in this country. I believe that public education is one of the greatest success stories in American history. Our public school graduates are some of the nation's best doctors, first responders, elected officials, entrepreneurs, educators, and hard workers in service and manufacturing industries. I also believe that we will rise to meet the challenges before us and create an education system the Commonwealth's children deserve. And I know that our best days are still before us. Members of the board, Kentucky has given so much to me: a quality public education, an opportunity for a world-class university experience, and a start to my professional career. And it showed me firsthand the inseparable connection between our schools and our community. My wife, Sarah, and I can't wait to relocate to the Bluegrass State and for our children to grow up there and go to public school in Kentucky. Thank you, thank you, thank you for giving me this opportunity to come home. I look forward to getting to work. Thanks again, Madam Chair and members of the board. I can't wait to get started.
Thank you, Jason, and congratulations. And we look forward to working with you very soon. All right, board, at this time, I am open to a motion to adjourn the meeting.
This
is Cody Johnson.
Thank you, Cody, for the motion. I was really wondering what we were going to do. And a second?
This is Claire Batt. I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Ms. Johnson and a second from Ms. Batt. Joanne, please, Jennifer, please call the roll.
Joanne Adams.
This is Joanne Adams. I vote yes.
Claire Batt.
This is Claire Batt. I vote yes.
Holly Bloodworth.
This is Holly Bloodworth. I vote yes.
Alvis Johnson.
This is Alvis Johnson. I vote yes.
Patrice McCrary.
This is Patrice McCrary. I vote yes.
Cody Johnson.
This is Cody Johnson. I vote yes.
Sharon Robinson.
This is Sharon Robinson. I vote yes.
Lee Todd.
This is Lee Todd, and I vote yes.
And Lou Young.
This is Lou Young, and I vote yes. Thank you, everyone.